We started by planning and trying to figure out what it was we were actually going to build. We probably spent a bit too long on this part, but we initially came to an idea of building a smart bookmark that'll be able to automatically track your reading, mainly because I'm lazy and needed something to motivate me to read, and Emma because she loves reading.
We knew we wanted to make an iOS app, but then we had to figure out what physical parts we needed to make the actual bookmark itself work. We knew the bookmark was going to be small, so we would have to use an Arduino Nano, and we also knew that all of the other parts that we bought would have to be pretty small so that they would fit into the bookmark.
We spent some time researching to figure out what to build it with. We eventually figured out we would need to use 2 light sensors on either side to detect when the bookmark is inside or outside of the book. The bookmark needs to communicate with the app, so we also needed to use a Bluetooth sensor. To make pairing seamless, we also decided to add an NFC chip for pairing it with the phone. All of this needs to be placed inside a rigid case, so we knew we'd also need to 3D print an enclosure for the components.
We made some initial UI designs so we could make sure that we aligned on the vision for the app and get an idea for where to start with the development. This also included coming up with our brand identity. We knew we needed to use a book API to find the books online. Ideally, we would have used Goodreads, but it no longer gives out API keys. We tried to use Google Books, but as you can see, the ordering of the results was bad and it only offered small-sized images for the book cover, which didn't work for our application. We then switched to the Open Library API, and the results were much better, but it has some incomplete data. The app now gets the number of pages from Google Books if it's missing from Open Library. When we came to implement the NFC functionality, the first issue was that we needed an Apple developer subscription to use NFC. We ended up paying for a subscription so we could continue with development. NFC is a pretty niche functionality which isn't used by many apps, so it's not that well documented, and we had to use a lot of trial and error to figure it out. Another issue here was that it's difficult to figure out how to trigger navigation from the asynchronous NFC methods.
Bluetooth was really hard, and we ran into lots of problems. First, we ordered the wrong type of sensor, thanks Amazon, and lost some time trying to figure out what on earth was going on. Getting it to pair with an iPhone was also a challenge, thanks to Apple and the many hoops they make you jump through. Once we figured that out, we ran into a problem with the wires being too thin, which is really painful to identify and debug. However, we pushed through and eventually got Bluetooth communication to work with the app.
Basically, this is the Bluetooth circuit, and then I've hooked it up to a button, and then right now it's flashing red, which means that nothing's paired to it. I'm going to run the app, and then the app's going to launch on my phone. It's going to connect, go solid red, and then see how the value not pressed.
Yeah.
And then when I hold down this button, it'll change to pressed. So it's sending the information there.
We need a light sensor on each side of the bookmark because if there's only one, then the user could put the bookmark down with the sensor facing down and then their reading wouldn't be logged. A challenge in this area was getting the threshold right so that it would pick up that the book was closed when the book was closed, but not when the bookmark was just in shadow.
Okay, so because it's in the light, we're currently reading, and then stop reading, start reading, stop reading. All right, so it's light, which means we're reading. Then, oh, it's kind of dodgy because I'm just putting my fingers over it. Stop. Book closed. Open. And then just one. And then, come on. Book closed, not reading. One light, we're reading. One goes dark, we're not reading. Other one goes light, we're reading. Goes dark, not reading. Both go light, reading, and then obviously it doesn't stop if you just darken one of them. Then if you darken both, you stop reading.
Very nice.
Wow.
We went into the coding thinking it would be relatively easy, both having experience in iOS dev. However, we were quite wrong when we realized all the pain points when it came to integration. Dealing with Apple's frameworks for NFC and Bluetooth were not easy, and even the stuff that should have been easy, like doing the API stuff, ended up causing problems.
For the data in the app, we had to figure out what data would be useful, what would be the best way to represent it, and how to calculate the values.
Another big issue was power. We hadn't initially thought on how on earth we're going to power this thing, so we had to quickly figure out a solution. Turns out button cell batteries work pretty well, and they're thin, so they can fit into the case. However, the casing for them is quite thick, so we ended up having to come up with a solution soldering batteries together, which is not ideal, but it did work for the prototype.
Neither of us had ever 3D printed anything before, so when it came to making the case, we had to figure out how to create the model, and we needed to get access to a 3D printer. One of our friends has access to Makerspace, so she was able to let us in so we could use their 3D printer. Another thing with the case was that we needed to add holes for the light sensors so that they would be able to detect when the bookmark was in the book. We also added a hole for the Bluetooth light, but it shines through the plastic, so we didn't actually end up needing it. The first print we did failed because the nozzle jammed, and then the second print was too small, so we had to put all of the components together and then measure the dimensions to figure out what size it actually had to be, which we probably should have done the first time, but first time 3D printers, what can you do? At this point, we also realized that our batteries would only have 5 hours of capacity, so we would need to come up with a solution where we could turn the bookmark on and off so it would last until the demo. We ended up using magnets to stick the top on the bookmark instead of gluing it together, so we would be able to open it up and access the switch that we put on the inside to turn it on and off. Initially, we were going to have a buzzer so that the user could ping their bookmark when they don't have it on them so they could find their book, but it ended up being not worth the space inside the bookmark.
Getting everything together and assembled was probably the most difficult part, and something that we severely underestimated how long it'll take us. Fitting everything into such a small case was really difficult, and we initially wanted to make 2 whole prototypes, but due to the time it actually took, we only ended up managing to get 1 complete. Another thing is soldering. So turns out soldering is hard and not fun. So we spent many hours soldering and trying to get everything together so it could all fit into the prototype. It's also incredibly overwhelming when you start putting everything onto the breadboard and it's somewhat irreversible and you have all these parts that you have one version of that you don't want to break.
We decided to add bookends to the ecosystem because it gives the user a place to store the bookmark when it isn't in use. We also sewed matching interchangeable cases for the bookmark and the bookend so that they would look like they were part of the same ecosystem. At first we thought the cover for the bookmark would need holes where the light sensors are, but turns out the fabric is thin enough that the light can get through. Another thing we wanted to add to the ecosystem was a lamp that turns on when the user is reading. Initially we thought we would do this by when the bookmark is out of the book, it would send a signal to the lamp, but because we're using light sensors in the bookmark, it doesn't really work out. So we ended up deciding to use a magnet sensor because there would be a magnet in the bookmark, so it would detect when the bookmark was placed on the light. Presumably you want the reading light on when you're reading, and that would turn the light on. We managed to get the lamp turning on in the presence of a magnet, but the magnet sensor we used wasn't strong enough to get a read through the metal of the lamp once it was actually installed in the lamp. We needed to switch to a different type of magnet sensor, and it was difficult to figure out with this new sensor the orientation that it needed to go to detect the magnet. Similarly to the bookmark, we had a lot of struggle with the small scale of the lamp and also with the soldering. We also decided to add to the lamp by adding the ability for the user to select which delay they would like. So it's no delay, 3 seconds, 30 seconds, a minute, or just always on. We think that being able to choose the mode of the lamp makes the product feel a lot more polished. So that is many weeks of work summed up in about 10 minutes. Here is a little demo of the product, and there is a full demo of the entire ecosystem in the demo video.
Overall, we're proud of the product we produced and its surrounding ecosystem. There were many things we wanted to do that we didn't manage to get done. This reflects on our inexperience with these types of projects, which impacted our ability to estimate how long tasks would take. As software engineers, the physical component of this project was completely new to us and had a high learning curve. Despite this, we were able to produce a polished product.